Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. No, I'm just kidding. Today we are going to be working on the LTZ400, the super clean yellow one that I did on my main channel. We're going to be working on showing what it takes to make a Chinese aftermarket carburetor tune just right and work well with a already well-running machine. So we have the Mikuni carburetor in here. We tuned it in one of my videos and got her running just perfectly. She's running real crisp. Everything's done on it. The only thing left on it is the carburetor. I wanted to take out the Mikuni, put in the niche, because it'll make this quad about $300 cheaper in the wintertime. It's much easier to sell a quad if it's $300 cheaper, than during the summer when I can ask, max price. So yeah, the goal is we're going to take this one out. We're going to put this one in. I'm going to show you what it is I typically do to get these Chinese ones working. There's a little trick to the trade. I know most of them, you can't just drop them in. They're not going to work right if you do that. So I'm going to take you through a little bit of a step-by-step and show you what I do to find success in getting these things tuned with a $38 carburetor versus a $350 carburetor. So let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, so to get access to the carburetors on the LTZ400s, I always just take off the seat, and typically I can get away with, sometimes you can work around this plastic, but sometimes it's easy if you just take it off. Kind of depends on how your quad setup is. On this one, I'm pretty sure I have enough access to work on it. So all you have to do really is turn off your fuel, unplug your fuel line, if it'll come off. There we go. And then there's two clamps. Take off your two clamps and get your carburetor off. I'm gonna run the gasoline out here into my catch can real quick. Just gonna quickly take the throttle cable off. This is my favorite method. I wedge it with a flat head, and then I just take a little pick and just work it off just like that. Unscrew your throttle cable. All right, so we have here the OEM Mikuni carburetor, and inside of here we have the niche carburetor. I've never tried one of these before. I've tried a lot of Chinese carburetors and had pretty good success with them, so I'll kind of just show you what I like to do. I don't use these hoses because they distract from where the fuel's coming out. I like to see it coming out the bottom. You don't need this plug, obviously, can be gone. This plug can be gone. One of the most important things to do to get right is to make sure that your receiver here, where your throttle cable comes in, is pretty much the same length as your OEM. See how these are like vastly different? This one's like much longer. That extra ½ inch to 3/4 of an inch will genuinely mess it up and not allow your throttle to retract all the way like it needs to. It needs to be able to go all the way back like that. So the first step is to make sure that's correct, and I'm gonna swap that out real quick. Luckily in the kit, most of these Chinese kits will come with the parts to put in the shorter one. At least on the LTZ400s, that's how it goes. So you can see here that it comes with a little nubby. So let's go ahead and put this nubby on here. All right, so to remove the intake tube on your carburetor, usually I take a pair of vice grips, get them nice and tight, clamp around there, and get it to bite really good, yeah. And then you usually can twist it left and right and pull outward, and she will make her way out. Not too bad. Now for putting the next one in, it's a little trickier. Get her started and then find a metal object or a table or something solid like a brick. Yeah, we'll use a brick. All right, we got Mr. Brick here. And then there is a notch right here that's completely in line with where you're going to be hammering down. And you just set that notch, let's see if I can do it in a way that shows it well, on your solid object like a brick, like such. Not the best example, but it's good enough. And then you just simply give it a few taps, and she's in. Don't hit her too hard because you don't want to damage your threads, but that's all it takes. And now you have the proper length of your intake tube for your throttle cable. So step one, make sure this is correct. You don't want that to be off, because your throttle just, it'll never work right. It'll always have acceleration and cause it not to start because it'll be dumping too much fuel in. So that's step one. Step two is to take off all your bottom screws and get your bowl off and look inside of here, and I'll show you what that looks like. All right, I got the 4 bolts off. Take off your bottom of your carburetor. Don't lose your gasket. And so right here is the biggest issue with pretty much all of the Chinese carburetors. It's typically the main jet and your pilot jet holes that they need to be a very precise size. And what happens is on a lot of these Chinese carburetors, they just throw in not very accurate jets here, and it causes so many issues with just too much fuel getting in, or not enough fuel popping, or just bogging out. And a lot of that is caused just by these 2 jets alone. I think the majority of the functionality of the jet, or of the carburetors, is relatively similar. I'm not going to say they're anywhere as good as the Japanese OEM parts, but they're generally made similar in spec if you buy a halfway decent one. This is a niche, and it looks like it's built pretty much the same. But yeah, this is the biggest thing. So the key that I use to getting these to run right is to swap out the pilot jet and idle jet with your OEM one. You want to make sure the jets are good and already tuned and running well. If not, then that's a whole different thing. You need to look up how to tune it. But for now, this is already assuming you have a tuned machine. And so a lot of times when this carburetor is already running well, you can drop those in and you should be close. You want to make sure you're, you have the exact same jets in there. And generally speaking, it's close enough that you can do the finishing tuning from there. So generally speaking, that's what I do. I swap out this one and this one, and we'll take it out of that one, and we'll put them in here. And after that, put it all back together. So I'm going to go ahead and take these out real quick. You just want to be careful to not break the brass on either of these. Don't be mean on them. So get these 2 out and put those 2 in from that carburetor. Easy. All right, so I got the Mikuni carburetor off. We're just going to steal this main jet. Make sure you put it on the main jet of this one. Steal this pilot jet. Stick that in the pilot jet hole. And typically, I don't worry about these third jets. They don't tend to make that big of a difference. I've moved them around quite a bit, and you don't feel it very much. So it's really just your main jet and pilot jet that we're going to swap. So I'm going to take these, put it in there, and then put the bottom back on. Make sure you get your gasket in there, and then tighten it all up, and then we'll put this on. All right, so now I have the Mikuni jets inside of here. We're going to go ahead and drop this on the machine. Make sure that if you use the same choke cable, put it in the same way it was before. Make sure your throttle cable goes all the way down like this when it's connected to the cable. Put it all back together just the way it was. Make sure your fuel's hooked up. You turn your fuel on, and then we'll go from there. Now, I would say about 50% of the time when you do that, they work just as they did on the OEM carburetors. I'd say the other 50%, at least in my experience, they don't run just right, and we'll kind of go from there. So let's go ahead and drop this on the bike and see what happens. All right, so I got my choke cable on here. I got my throttle cable. Once again, make sure your throttle cable can retract all the way like that. It's very important, or you're not going to be able to start it sometimes, especially if it's pulled a little bit. So go ahead and put this on, get the 2 clamps on, and hook up our fuel. All right, we got the carburetor all back on there. Last thing to do is hook up our fuel. Just as simple as that. And for this one, I have to use prime because we have the vacuum thing disconnected. So make sure you get fuel in there just like it was before. And then in theory, we can try and start her up, see what she does. This battery might be dead. Just needed a little choke. All right, let's see how she idles. Uh-oh. What happened? It's a little rainy. We'll give her a go, see how she rides. No pop yet. Seems to rev out pretty good. That was a little poppy that time. All right, so she's running pretty good. That's typically how I do the installs for those. Nothing crazy, just swap out the jets for the most part, put it back on. Generally speaking, it's also important to check your fuel screws. So on the OEM one here, the fuel screw is down that chute right there. So you want to check how many counts that one has, and then you want to do the same on your aftermarket. And I didn't do that because the aftermarket didn't have that accessible, but it looks like I might have to. Okay, so it's running great with the niche carburetor on there, with the exception of the idle. It tends to want to kind of just die off when it's idling, and when you give it a quick rev and you let off really quick, it has a little bit of a pop on the back end. So I think it's safe to say we're running a little bit lean at the idle, but everything else while I was riding out there felt really good in the mid to the upper end. So when you have a lower end issue like idle dropping off, that's going to be an issue with your fuel screw or with your idle jet. And I believe we have the bigger idle jet on here, so really all we need to do is adjust our fuel screw on this one. So interestingly, on the niche, they have these weird little plugs. Like typically on a Mikuni, there's a brass plug and you have to drill into it. But on the Mikunis, they have this little double circle thing here. If you can get your little circlip remover in there, you can actually unwind the clip with just a circlip tool here, and then kind of work it out with your fingers or a needle after that. It's way easier than the OEM style where you have to use a drill and tap that thing out. Man, it can be a pain. So I like this design quite a bit, but obviously I don't prefer a Chinese over an OEM if it was my own bike. So just going to work out this little plug real quick. There we go. Now I have more grip. And really all we should have to do is probably turn this out maybe a quarter throttle, and I think she'll be in that sweet spot. So there we go. We got the plug out of the way. Now we have access to our fuel screw. We'll take our flathead, go in there. Let's see where she's at first off. It's at a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's at basically a 3, so we'll try 3.5. Make sure. Actually, no, it's at 3.5. Dang. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it needs another half turn, which would be 4, which is really far out for that. It's quite possible we might have to adjust the idle screw with this carburetor, but we'll try another half turn out, see if she idles a little better and doesn't do that tiny bit of popping when we do the quick let off of the gas when we're revving it. So we'll try this and go from there. All right, we got everything hooked back up here, got the fuel back on, and the only thing we changed was the half turn out on the fuel screw, and I had to bump down the idle a little bit. Every time you mess with the fuel screw, if you add more fuel, you're going to have to lower your idle a little bit. So I already did that. Unfortunately, the audio was terrible. So now she starts up, and she's idling really well. Before, when she was on the lower end of the RPMs like this, it would just bog out and die. Now it's able to hold on the lower RPMs because the fuel ratio is correct. It's not running as lean, so we can bump it up a little bit. But she's idling really well. When you give it a nice rev, you don't hear that slight popping on the back end. So I think we got her pretty good. If it ends up doing a little bit of popping or dying on me, I might have to go a little bit further out, maybe a quarter turn. But overall, I think these niche carburetors are pretty nice. Typically, I bought a lot of Amazon carbs, and they do sell this one on Amazon, but this is the first niche I've bought, so far pretty happy. This is my first one, and it literally was drop in, and all I had to do was change the fuel screw just a little bit, which I probably had done on the OEM one anyway. So pretty good aftermarket one so far, but they can be hit or miss. So that's how I do the aftermarket carburetors. I've had pretty good success. Every once in a while, some of them will be so far off, and they'll be pretty bad with the way that you can adjust the needle position that I literally have just ordered new ones. If they're so far off it won't even start, then either you mess something up or the carburetor's just so bad or something's messed up from the factory. A lot of these Chinese ones just have defects right out of the box, and so you just need to really know what you're looking out for. Make sure all of the functionalities are working on them, and then make sure the jets match so that you're not chasing jet sizes. And overall, I think that's pretty much it. If you have like slight issues with bogging out or popping, then I would recommend you watch a tuning video. This is not a tuning video. This is more of just how I get them on there, what my trick is, and ultimately it's using those OEM jets, making sure your throttle cable is not messed up, and then just the small stuff. That's the biggest thing, is using those jets, to be honest. I've dropped in a lot of Amazon carbs, and they very rarely will work right off the bat. So yeah, that's it for this video. I appreciate you guys watching. If you like this content, please leave a like and subscribe. And otherwise, I will see you in the next one. Peace.